Hello and welcome back to YellowCard Vanguard. In today's Cram School, we've got a bit more of an applied topic for you today, because we're going to be looking at the concept of the floor and the ceiling in Vanguard, what that means and how you can build towards it, and in particular, we're going to be looking at it in the context of VBT12's Gurguit. So before we get into explaining what we're going to be looking at for Gurguit, let's explain what the terms floor and ceiling mean. As you can imagine, floor being something very low down refers to the worst case scenario for a deck, and ceiling being quite high up refers to the best case scenario for a deck. It's very worth mentioning that these best case, worst case scenarios refer to the expected outcome and performance of the deck, not its conditions. So for example, being able to sack crits and kill your opponent on the first grade 3 turn, that doesn't count as a ceiling, that counts as a high roll. Likewise, having to G-assist twice because you didn't find your pieces, that doesn't count as the floor, that counts as low rolling. The terms are very similar, so it's easy to get confused, but what's important here is that one is describing the conditions and the other is describing the outcome. So when a deck has a high floor, that means that provided the conditions are there, it will always do something very, very strong. The worst thing that the deck can do is strong. Let's take Luard as an example. Luard is a very high floor because it is able to consistently generate force markers and plus very easily with very minimal resource investment, and it's very hard to deny. So it's always going to get its game plan running. Whereas something like Godhand has a very high ceiling, because if you can hit 3 stat front triggers off of its drive checks, your numbers are going to be massive, you have multiple attacks, many of which are going to be unguardable, and you will be able to get a lot of damage in for free at minimal investment. Again, how likely they are to happen is another story. So for example, Luard's high floor happens very often, whereas Godhand's high ceiling does not happen very often. But again, this is nothing to do with how strong the floor and the ceiling of these decks are. The first concept I want to talk about here, before we talk about Gurguit itself, is evaluating whether the floor or the ceiling is important. So let's take a look at an old example. Let's take a look at Dominate from Nubatama back in the G series. That was a deck that had a very, very high floor, because as long as it got to second stride, it would go into a Rene and it would dominate your units and bash you with plus 10k and crit multiple times, all of which would be very difficult to guard because they're ripping cards out of your hand. This deck was very strong, but it also didn't have much of a ceiling, because it couldn't just outright win the game. Like yes, Rene was arguably an incredibly busted card and it really shouldn't have existed. However, it wasn't comparable to say ZTB, which could take an extra turn and each turn attack you 5 or 6 times with several pokes. That is a high ceiling. Gears also had a very high floor to go with it, but that's another story. So usually when you evaluate things like a floor or the ceiling of a deck, you do it in a vacuum, based on what can this deck do and how strong is that, not how often it happens or what you need to get going. So for example, a combo that requires 8 specific pieces in hand, you could consider that a ceiling, sure, because you need a lot of specific pieces to go right, but what you should really be looking at is, when you hit that combo, does it win you the game? Whereas for something like, say, Oracle Think Tank or Royal Paladin, decks that already have a lot of searching power and so therefore can get going very easily, you want to be looking at your floor, because you know that you're going to be able to execute your game plan every single time, but how strong is that game plan that you're executing every single time, not accounting for like, oh, the best case scenario of, oh, I have this extra booster. With that out of the way, very briefly, let's look at the application of this in Gurguit. Specifically, let's look at whether or not you play the Ezel engine in Gurguit. Obviously the set hasn't released in Japanese yet, so we don't even have any results to play with, we're just going entirely off of theory, but that's what Cram School is for. The reason you can even consider the Ezel Superioride engine in Gurguit is because Gurguit has to play one Ezel. This card is such a strong enabler of all your combos, it gives you a massive power increase, it's a huge tempo buff despite not actually being a plus. So it's a card that you want to see as much as you can, therefore this is a card that you're already playing at 4 of. And it itself also has the ability to Superioride. Now the trade-off is that to Superioride, you need to be playing Howl, who is arguably a do-nothing because your Ezel's probably never going to be on the Vanguard because you're going to rewrite over it with Gurguit, and therefore having to have this 10k shield, 8k vanilla is kind of bad, right? But the argument is that the benefits you get from that extra Axel going first when you Superioride Ezel, it really makes a big difference and is, some people are saying that it's worth it, and some people are saying that it's not. So before we look at what you play if you don't play Ezel, I'm going to talk a little bit more about why Ezel increases the floor of this deck rather than increases the ceiling. It increases the ceiling because it's the best case scenario, right? Oh, you happen to open your Wonder Ezel and you happen to open the Howl, therefore you can search for your Ezel, and then when you rewrite Gurguit, you'll have 2 to 3 XL markers, depending on whether or not you have Percival in hand. But in reality, what it's doing is increasing the floor, because you're not always going to hit the Ezel, but when you do, it's going to make your base game plan so much stronger. So when you have Gurgit's plus 5k to your front row, having that extra Axel marker to be extra power to, while also having an extra unit on the board, while also having Ezel's on attack call from hand to enable multi-attack combos in the early game, so you can keep up tempo and pressure, that makes your core game plan so much stronger. Something like, say, a grade 2 with when it's called by an effect would gain plus 15,000 power for the turn, that would be increasing your ceiling, because it's not something that you want to be going for very often, but it makes it that your already good game plans become better. And what we're saying is that by playing the Ezel engine, rather than making your good game states better, you're making a number of your bad game states good. And that's why it's increasing the floor. Because there are games where you go first, and you don't have Ezel, and you have to ride the Gurgit, and your first aggro turn is very weak, and then Ezel makes it so that those aggro turns are not very weak and potentially threatening. Now let's flip over and look at a non-Ezel list for a second here, and there's some equally good cards, like say Sagramore, Jeffrey, a higher ratio of live cards that are good all the time. But the thing about this deck is that this deck has a very low floor, but a very high ceiling, because when it goes first, it doesn't have that pressure from the Ezel, it doesn't have the plussing from the extra Axel marker, it just has to hit the Gurgit, and it has to hit the Percival. So the requirements for this deck to be effective and strong are much lower, so the case of high rolling versus low rolling is less impactful, but when it's trying to win the game, it just doesn't win as much because it doesn't have that extra Axel marker. All it has is a Sagramore who extends your early play and your early combos and doesn't help you finish the game with an extra attack. And so this is why we're looking at, do you build towards the floor or do you play towards the ceiling? So if you think that you want to increase your floor by saying, I want to do good things all the time, that's why you would play the Ezel engine. Because whether or not you go first or second, whether or not you have the Ezel engine or not, that option is available to the deck and it gives you an extra edge in the combo. Whereas if you're saying, I don't mind having some games where I don't do anything, thus, the Sagramore not being there, and then you don't have the plus power from the Gurgit, but you're saying that, oh, if I go second though, and I have the Sagramore, then I'm definitely going to win the game, then that's building towards the ceiling. As to which is correct or incorrect for standard, there's no real answer right now, because we don't know how the meta is going to evolve with the VBT12, we haven't really got any results, and Luard is still dominating the meta, and so it's kind of hard to say, but this is just kind of illustrates how the theory of deck building can influence your card choices and your card ratios. So for example, the reason we play for Howl, despite it being vanilla in the Ezel list, is because it's critical to get that Ezel combo off, even though it's very high rolly. Whereas we play Jeffrey, because even though it's very low ceiling, it massively ups your consistency, so you'll be able to reach that floor more often. So that's kind of exploring like the two different options here. I've shown you both deck lists that I've built. I personally still believe that the Ezel list is stronger, because even though your floor is higher, you also have a little bit more ceiling in some edge cases here and there as well, in exchange for being way more high rolly and a bit more sacky compared to the non-Ezel build. But here's both lists, feel free to try them out yourself, play test them yourself, see what you like and see what you don't like, let me know what you think. And I'll probably be covering this a little bit more when the set comes out in English, because I'm a big fan of Percival and Agraville, as you may know. But that's kind of it for now. Like, this one was just originally going to be a cram school about ceiling and floor, because I've been talking about those concepts a lot over the last few weeks with a lot of different people, and this was just kind of a way to like really put down those thoughts into a more accessible form for everyone to watch. Hopefully that's been interesting, hopefully you've learned something about card game theory and fundamentals, and hopefully that'll make you a better deck builder in the future if you keep practicing. But for now, that's going to be it for today. I would like to talk a little bit more about ceiling, floor, high roll, low rolling, this sort of like theory crafting a bit more in future videos, but we'll have to find time for those another day. So, as always, thank you very much for Strict Broken TCG for sponsoring the channel and these videos. You can use the code SBTCG YellowCard for a 10% checkout at discount on your playset pre-orders of Gold Paladin when the set eventually comes out in English. And of course, thank you to you for watching the video, supporting the channel. If you like what we're making, feel free to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, keep up to date with what we're doing, watch the live streams on Twitch, which are every Wednesday, and if nothing else, we'll see you guys in the next episode, and bye bye.